This is Dave, the Guru, and another tutorial using GameSalad. In this video, we're going to talk about tables, and we're going to demonstrate how we use them, and we're going to talk about why we use tables. So let's start off with some basics about why we use tables. Now you can see over here, I'm on the game level attributes area of GameSalad. So let's just go ahead and say we're usually programming our game, and we'd go ahead and make some different attributes over here. Now something happens when we run our game on a device, and it's called the scan rate, or more known as the frame rate. That means the number of times the code is scanned every cycle. And so when we add attributes at the game level, whether these attributes are active on the scene or not, they become part of the scan. So whether they're in use or not in a particular instance or stage in our game, these become part of the code scan. The reason we use tables is because tables are actually static attributes or variables. In other words, they don't become part of the code scan until we call on them from within our code. This is actually helpful, as having tons of game level attributes can actually cause your frame rate to go down. And so this is why we like to use tables instead of specific game level attributes, because these attributes in tables are not called during the code scan, and it allows us to store lots more information without taking away from the frame rate of our game. So let's go into the home, and then let's come over to the tables tab. And as you can see, we have a purchase table, and this is related to in-app purchases. This is a default table, and we don't modify that or use that unless we're doing IAP purchases. So let's go ahead and make our own table by coming down and hitting the plus icon. And we can rename the table by double-clicking it. And we'll just call this the test table for now. And we can double-click it, or we could come up here to this tab and select the table. So now we're inside the table. And this is basically, a table is simply a spreadsheet. You have columns and rows where information is stored. So you can increase the amount of rows, and you can increase the amount of columns. Now, the type of information in a table is restricted to the column. So whatever we set, the information or the attribute we're going to define in a column is set to all the rows in that column as well. So it's all defined by the column. So if we were to make this an integer attribute, all the rows related to that column can only be integers. The same way with text, or a boolean, or an angle, or a real attribute. So when making tables and setting up table information, you need to understand that it's all defined by the column. Each row is defined by its column. And as you can see, we can have all the types of attributes that we use at the game level in GameSalad. And so this really allows us to put in all this predefined information, or even have places to store information in here that is not part of the scan rate. So we could have tons of rows, tons of columns. We can label the header here. We could call this move positions. And in the move position, we'd probably want a real attribute. We could call this on off using a boolean. We could call this questions for like a quiz game. And we would have the text in here related to the questions. And then you could have a column for the answers, and etc. And then you can address everything in your code by knowing the column and row number. You can also import pre-made CSVs in a spreadsheet program into this. So if you want to work in a spreadsheet program with lots of information, or you wanted to find something like a dictionary online, which there are a lot of, that are already set up in the spreadsheet format, and then use them in a word type game, you can go ahead and do that. The only thing is that you have to come in once you've imported and set all the parameters of your columns. And in a later video, we'll get into that. So let's go back to the home screen, and then let's go to a scene, and I have an actor here, and I've broken out some of the different behaviors that we use specifically for tables. So we have the starting one here, which is change table value. And this is where we would come in when we want to actually change a value in a table. And so when we do that, we would come in and we would find our table, which is under the game level, and there is our test table. Now, one of the things, let me show you real quick, I'll go back, is I always like to name my tables with a .tbl. This really helps me find them when I'm in the game level. So you can see when I'm up here at the game level now, it makes it easier for me to spot a table because of all the things that are listed here. If you name something and it's similar to an attribute, you might not remember what you named the table. So I always try to name it with a TBL at the end so I know that's my table. So this defines the table that we're going to write to. And then we can pick a row. So we'd say row 1, column 1, and we can just put in a value. Since we know that was a real attribute, we could say 120.5. Now you have to make sure when you're writing to a table that you remember the column, what it's set for. So you're not trying to write a true, false value or something with decimal places that's an integer or whatever. So you really need to keep track of this stuff. Now this would, when fired, would write to row 1, column 1, and write this value. So let's go ahead and we'll test that real quick. We'll come down and get a display text. And we'll go ahead and display that table. And I'll show you how we do that really quickly. And we're going to get into some of this later on. This is just a basic walkthrough. So we would come down into the functions, and we're going to insert the function table cell value. So we're looking for a table cell value. And in this, you'll see the first thing it asks us for is the table itself. What table are we looking at? So we go to our game, our table, and then we need the row number. We have a row number and our column number. Okay, and we have that. And so let's go ahead and just make a rule in here real quick so that we can see the difference. Touch is pressed, and we'll change this. So let's go ahead and we'll go back and bring this actor onto the scene. And we will go ahead and just spread this out a little bit. And let's go ahead and preview. And so as you can see right now, our default value in the table was 0. So now when I press on this, it'll change the table value. And so you can see it changed the table value to 120.5, which is what I had it set at. So we wrote the information into the table. Now, if I refresh the game at this point, the table value goes to default. So let's look at another behavior that's going to help us permanently put that value into the table. So let's go back, and we'll go into our actor, and let's go into this custom, and we're going to go ahead and grab this save table behavior. So we're going to put this right below this value, and we're going to come in and we're going to select our table, and then we'll see what happens. Let's go ahead and hit preview. So we have our thing, and we push it, and we have 120.5. So now when we recycle, you're going to see that the value is stored or permanently saved now in the table. So no matter what the person does playing the game, whether the game quits in the background or whether the game crashes or whether they back out of the game or whatever, that information is now stored in that place. And unlike the load and save behaviors, you don't have to worry about putting that logic necessarily into your first scene and to load that. Now we can go and grab that piece of information from the table wherever and whenever we want, and everything across the game where we're looking at that piece of information is now updated automatically. This is why it's much easier to use tables. Makes your logic much more slim, less behaviors, less things to remember. Ooh, do I need to load this here and do that there? Tables makes it so easy. We write to it, we save it, and now it's accessed across everything where we want to look at that specific piece of information. We can also come in and we can add a row or remove a row during gameplay. So this is where we would have a table. Now you would need to preset the table with at least one row and a column. And then what you want to do is define that column, either a text attribute or whatever. And then once you've done that, you can go in and select your table, and then you can add or remove rows at the beginning, at the end, at an index. So you can say which row you want to start to add from. So you can start at the beginning, adding them at the top, or adding them at the end. This is very handy for doing a list of like top scores. Makes it really easy to do, easy to save. Don't have to worry about loading all kinds of things. So you can have like a top 10 high score list easily by adding rows or taking them away and where you want to insert that particular score at a certain point. And then we also have another behavior called loop over table behavior. And what this does is allows us to basically scan over a table or look around a particular table, either its rows or its columns, and we can start where we want to start scanning for it. And then we can have it do specific types of things, so we can start looking for certain values or whatever, and it'll loop through the table until it finds that value. And then we can say, when you found that value, you can go ahead and do something. So these are the basic behaviors that we use in Game Salad. So let's go ahead and just close this up for a minute. We'll close these up, and let me quickly show you what we can do as well in rules. So let's make a rule. So put that in there. Let's make a rule right here. And so we can now go down and we could say numeric expression. And now this gives us the expression editor on both sides in a rule. So we could go ahead and say when table cell value, and we say the table and the row and the column that we're looking for a specific piece of information. And then we can say when it matches another particular value in another place in our table, row 2, column 1, when these two values equal each other, or any other type of operator we want to use when they don't equal or whatever, so we can now actually look at two different aspects in a table, two pieces of data in a table, and then say when they meet certain values, either in a numeric, and you can do it as text, as a text expression, okay, for word games. So we could look at two pieces of a table information and then compare them and say, okay, do this when they match, contain, begin, end with, does not contain, is not. This is great for word games. And the great thing about using tables like this is for two reasons. One, it takes away from the scan rate, especially if you were to use like a large dictionary. And also, what it does is allows you to update information, change information, swap information without having to go back and build all the code that you would have to do with load and save attributes. Really saves a lot of time, condenses your code, makes it easier to build integrated code in your game, and the less rules and behaviors and code that you have, the better your game runs, the easier it is to debug, and just a better overall experience and speed at which the game will play and move, and the frame rate will be for your game. Tables are invaluable for doing that. So this is the basic introduction to tables, why we use them, kind of how we use them, and as we go through the next lessons, we'll start to see different ways that we can manipulate and really use tables to build integrated code and make our game programming more efficient, slimmer, save time, and our games run better. You can find me on the forums under the name Lost Oasis Games. This is Dave, the Guru. I'll see you in the next video.